My name is Terri Messenger, and I am
Hey, and welcome to Terri Messenger's Genius Zone. And, this is the place in the space where you are going to get your own free masterclass absolutely free.
Just be devastated at that level, to not mentally have been prepared at all for that coming down. And my OB was kind and listened to me and said, I'm sorry, let's see if we can set you up with a reproductive endocrinologist and kind of look at some stuff. Some mishap happened with the front office staff, and I was sent over to a geneticist instead of a reproductive endocrinologist. So I went into an appointment hoping to find some answers, to look more at my hormones, to understand better why do I continue to miscarry. I'm getting pregnant, but I'm obviously not carrying that through. And the confusion, I showed up, it was a geneticist, and she went over, well, for $10,000, you can do this test, and for $10,000. And I paused her. I said, I'm very sorry. I was looking for a reproductive endocrinologist. I am sorry about the miscommunication. And the word said to me in that moment,
PMS and going through all of those elements.
That there are ways to balance your hormones. I feel like my frustration is that every doctor that most of these young girls see get told to just start birth control without really understanding the effects of what that does long term. And a lot of those birth controls mean that they are not cycling at all. And so we do a lot of long-term damage when we don't ever cycle. But that also means you don't need to suffer like that. If your body's functioning and your hormones are balanced, you are not having severe PMS. You're not curled up in the fetal position for 4 days a week with cramping, diarrhea, can't get out of bed. That's not normal either, and there are answers to fixing that. It doesn't mean that that's the way you need to just live your life. I mean, even just recently talking to a lot of my friends, they went back on birth control because they're in their 40s, but they can't handle their periods. They can't get out of bed for 4 or 5 days a week and don't find that they can function in their life that way. And that is not the answer. There's so many better ways to look at your hormones and balance them out. And there's a lot of diet things that we can do that really helps balance those out in a much healthier way.
Hey, and welcome to this week's podcast with Terri Messenger. And we're going to talk about a subject that may be a little taboo in public, especially, for women. And this is all around the suffering that a lot of women go through with their hormones. And we're going to bring on a nurse practitioner, a gorgeous lady by the name of Jenica, who literally helps people who are struggling with their hormones, where they are totally sometimes even in lockdown and finding their lives becoming miserable because of that little thing we call hormones that is actually running our entire life. Now, this can lead to so many issues, chronic fatigue. And, sometimes if you are suffering from many of these things, maybe if you are trying to have a baby, you might find yourself in this, real frustration of why isn't this working? And yet you may just find out something. Maybe you are way past that stage like myself, and you may be going through perimenopause or really suffering in silence that way. On the other hand, even if you are over onto the other side, your hormones are literally running a bigger part of your life than you may even know. So what I'd like you to do is perhaps sit back, relax, because this woman is so passionate about helping you to be heard, helping you to know that you don't have to put up with a dysfunctional life. Her own personal experience, as you're going to get to hear, is leading and has led her to changing so many people's lives, men and ladies. So with no further ado, I would love to bring on the beautiful Jenica. Hi, how are you, Jenica?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I feel that this is a subject that is really needed, and yet one that might be a little confronting, and one that a lot of people might be really suffering in silence about. But, obviously hormones have a lot to do with, so much of our lives, and people may not even know this or realize this. But your journey begins where you were really struggling with your weight when you were younger. Can you talk us through that and what that meant for you, what was happening with your body, how you were kind of led to believe by what, so society might say that you needed to eat differently and exercise? But share that journey of where you began and what actually happened to you as a teenager.
Yeah, I mean, I think I started my first diet when I was like 11 and proceeded to kind of ebb and flow with whatever the current fad was at the time. You want to be like everyone else and fit in, and it fit into clothes that every girl's wearing in high school. And I just never did. I was never built that way, and started dieting and started trying different things. And it was just an uphill battle, and I don't think I understood a lot about my body and what it needed and how to fuel it better. I just looked more of it as restriction, and I've come so far in understanding how that restriction portion of dieting is like one of the worst things we can do hormonally. And so I metabolically just kind of continually put me on this path that never set me up for success. It was a yo-yo up and down, and that very much led to hormone issues from all that restriction.
Wow, and that's quite a big eye opener right there, because how many people do we know that go on diets? And look, as a clinical hypnotherapist, we are told that the diets are the first thing that have to go. Because apart from the fact that the word diet has the word die in it, that's enough to tell you enough. But what I found out becoming a clinical hypnotherapist is that, because we use the mindset to balance the entire body, get rid of the diets, actually put all that aside and learn how to listen to your body, learn how to eat at the right time, and don't put yourself into a position where you feel either like you are suppressing what you truly want, or having to overdo it with exercises. So you really are anti the big exercises that they say that, people need to do if they want to, lose weight. Can you explain what kind of exercises that you would actually recommend with your experience as a nurse, and also, what you went through as a young lady?
Yeah, I mean, I think we get a lot of pressure that cardio is the answer to all of that. Endless amounts of cardio. You just need to do more cardio. I don't think anybody really talked to me or taught me about weightlifting or the importance of muscle and how it is so a huge portion of where glucose can be managed in our muscles. And so, building that muscle is everything that we need. And instead, we're just taught cardio, cardio, cardio. And so I was much older when I learned about the benefits of lifting weights, and not to be some bodybuilder, but that muscle is super important for our, overall metabolism and our ability to use glucose efficiently.
So basically, keep your body muscular. Like, I don't do a lot of weightlifting, but what I do is I make sure that I am using my arms, I am tightening my body, I am making sure that my muscles don't turn to flab. But speaking of flab, let's move to fat now. And, you were saying how, and this is very true too, that, most dietitians, doctors, and people in this life, they will tell you, stay away from fatty foods. Fatty foods are no good for you. Well, Jenica here is here to tell you something else. Would you like to explain about the fallacy of fatty foods?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think most of us anybody who grew up near the 80s heard low fat, fat is bad, right? And we're learning so much effects of how not eating any fat is so poor for us. We need that fat. And that doesn't mean necessarily you're going to eat pizza and cheeseburgers, but we do need those healthy fats in order to make our hormones. And so when we look at that, avocados and nuts and olive oil and, different things that we can put on our vegetables can really be so beneficial when we think about the fact that cholesterol is at the root of all of our hormones, and we need to be eating fat. It's not bad.
Yeah, I love that. And my husband would have to be one of the biggest pork chop fans that I know. And we both fight over the fat on the pork chop. And he's, as much as he may have other issues, his cholesterol is perfect. And you wouldn't know a person who eats pork chop fat as much as he does. But it's interesting how, as a clinical hypnotherapist also, we're told to switch on our metabolism by listening to our body, and rather than, really suppressing what we want, to listen to what we do want. And if we go back to knowing what we're craving, so if we are craving fat, have something fatty. If you are craving carbohydrates, eat carbohydrates. But the secret comes with the ability to tap into what your body is really saying. And I feel that you, as the more practical person who's a nurse and a real expert in this field, you probably have come to know that people, by doing the wrong thing by themselves, have totally messed up their hormones. So perhaps your own experience first, what it meant for you, that time of the month, and how that impacted you when you were trying to have children.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it was such a different mindset of looking at how do I nourish my body instead of just looking at food as good, bad, the ugly. It's really about nourishing your body. And for me, I didn't understand, you get diagnosis from the doctor, and you get told, like at the time I'd been told I had polycystic ovarian syndrome. Well, everybody could tell me that's a diagnosis and having kids would be hard. But what they didn't explain to me is a lot of that comes on from insulin resistance. And why am I having insulin resistance? A lot of that is my diet and lifestyle and different things that I was doing. But no education was really provided for me on that. I was given a birth control pill and sent out the door, and not really any education about the fact that my diet can be very much impacting that. The type of exercise I was doing was very much going to impact that. I just knew I was handed a birth control and told to leave. Well, several years down the road, that really did impact on my journey of being able to have a child. It significantly impacted that. And I didn't feel like I had any answers. I had 2 miscarriages, and I was pretty devastated after that second miscarriage. The first one I'd kind of had signs that, and going into it, I knew that I was probably going to miscarry. The second one, there was no signs. I went in for my 12-week ultrasound appointment, and there was no heartbeat. And to just be devastated at that level, to not mentally have been prepared at all for that coming down. And my OB was kind and listened to me and said, I'm sorry, let's see if we can set you up with a reproductive endocrinologist and kind of look at some stuff. Some mishap happened with the front office staff, and I was sent over to a geneticist instead of a reproductive endocrinologist. So I went into an appointment hoping to find some answers, to look more at my hormones, to understand better, why do I continue to miscarry? I'm getting pregnant, but I'm obviously not carrying that through. And the confusion, I showed up, it was a geneticist, and she went over, well, for $10,000, you can do this test, and for $10,000. And I paused her. I said, I'm very sorry. I was looking for a reproductive endocrinologist. I am sorry about the miscommunication. And the words said to me in that moment, I was super hormonal, were just not helpful. When she said, it says a blank medicine on the door, I should have known that it was a geneticist. And at the time, I just felt completely and utter hopeless is how I felt.
Yeah. And I mean, let's face it, when people are going through a saga like that, with or without the hormonal issues going on, that's enough to make any woman. I know I was one of these women who really was impacted during my, I guess, the reproductive years. And I used to suffer terribly with PMS. And after I'd had my third child, I then had postnatal depression. I didn't realize that my hormones were all over the place. So that was leaving me with PMS, the kind of menstrual tension you get during the course, and then after. So I used to joke around that I had one good week in the entire month. And, can I ask, I mean, obviously that's a long time ago for me since I had my third child, but what would you say to a woman in that predicament that was that her hormones were all over the place, she was suffering PMS and going through all of those elements?
That there are ways to balance your hormones. I feel like my frustration is that every doctor that most of these young girls see get told to be just start birth control, without really understanding the effects of what that does long term. And a lot of those birth controls mean that they are not cycling at all. And so we do a lot of long-term damage when we don't ever cycle. But that also means you don't need to suffer like that. Like, if your body's functioning and your hormones are balanced, you are not having severe PMS, you're not curled up in the fetal position for 4 days a week with cramping, diarrhea, can't get out of bed. That's not normal either, and there are answers to fixing that. It doesn't mean that that's the way you need to just live your life. I mean, even just recently talking to a lot of my friends, they went back on birth control because they're in their 40s, but they can't handle their periods. They can't get out of bed for 4 or 5 days a week and don't find that they can function in their life that way. And that is not the answer. There's so many better ways to look at your hormones and balance them out. And there's a lot of diet things that we can do that really helps balance those out in a much healthier way.
Do you reckon that's why our society talks about midlife crisis for both men and women? Do you think that's got a lot to do with our hormones and the way that our body is functioning with all of these hormones going everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, it just in general, right? Like our diets, the things that are in there. But one of the biggest reasons that hormones are not being made is what we call blood sugar dysregulation. And that just really accounts to sugars coming way up and way down in this roller coaster. Really affects the way we make our hormones efficiently. When our bodies have to spend so much effort making insulin, it's not making your testosterone and your estrogen the way it should. And that blood sugar dysregulation is the hardest thing that we face. And so when we can kind of just look at simple things of how do we balance that better, but as we get older, we don't make hormones as efficiently, as quickly, as fast. And so when we get behind the eight ball with these like diet roller coaster and our hormones become even more imbalanced, definitely leads to more of these midlife crises. So it's this ongoing thing as we age. But there's a lot of things that we can do to make sure that we do age well, that we're not a mess in all of our hormones, but it's just kind of knowing those things to do.
And then it becomes a bit like this vicious circle as well, because, you talk about the insulin, and then because of that dysregulation, then it moves into thyroid, and then it moves into chronic fatigue syndrome. And then it's going through this kind of dog eat dog, situation. I kind of came to realize at some point of my life that estrogen and me just didn't gel. A lot of the time, like I'll ask you this as a question first. Is it true that before a woman's cycle, her estrogen levels go up?
Yeah, so your progesterone kicks in the most as the uterine lining thickens. That's where you're getting a lot of that progesterone. So that's again where you hear this term a lot called estrogen dominance. For people, it's not necessarily that they have too much estrogen, it's that they don't have enough progesterone to balance it out. And for a lot of people, that's coming because they are on birth control, they're not cycling like they should, they're not letting that uterine wall thicken like it should. And so that creates what we call estrogen dominance, but that's more coming from the fact that a lot of women don't have enough progesterone. So there's things that we can do to kind of optimize progesterone levels that create a much healthier like cycle. And again, a lot of it is diet. You've got to really be nourishing your body with the right foods and the right things that it needs to be successful.
And I guess that fatty food and supplements are going to be a really big part of that. But I was going to say, yes, you answered my question nicely. So at that point, whenever my estrogen levels were high, and if I went on the pill, I was crazy. I was a crazy woman. Like, you've never seen anything. I mean, I feel better now on the other side of it all than I have ever done during those years where, I was in those reproductive years. And what I did find is that progesterone for me was, a really big thing. That would really make me calm. That would make me happy. And of course, for men, so if a man was listening to this, how much is too much testosterone? Because I know a lot of men who, want to be masculine and they want to have a good sex drive and all of those things, want to have the testosterone. How much is too much testosterone? What is the right amount, and how can a man or even a woman, because I think women have testosterone too, right?
Oh yeah, that's a huge part of like energy and sex drive for women. So, I mean, there's a lot of women who have zero sex drive, and that very much comes down to their testosterone levels because that's not normal either. That's a healthy part of any relationship, and so you want to make sure that that's checked in for women just as much as men. And for men, like there's not a black and white answer. I mean, I think there's a middle of the row. I think there's a lot of fear with testosterone that if you're going to supplement it, that you're going to rage and be way off the top of the charts. But there's actually a lot of damage when we leave that testosterone super low, because you see a lot of increase in depression, anxiety, PTSD for men who are not producing enough testosterone, and it stays in that really, really low level. And so we really do find a lot of benefits if we can get it up into that middle, healthy of the row, range. I don't know that there's a black and white answer because everybody physiologically does a little bit better and different. But I'm very much about getting my patients out of the like way bottom range, because a lot of them will go in their doctor and they'll be like, well, they said it was normal, but they're having all these symptoms. Again, I do not prescribe to number medicine. So if you talk to me and you're very symptomatic and you have those problems, I think you need to find a provider who hears you out and really listens to what's going on, because the answer can't be your numbers are normal. If you are having symptoms for a man, if you are anxious and you are fatigued and you have no sex drive and you do not have any desire to get up and go to the gym and to work out, these are serious signs, and we don't just leave them there and say, well, your numbers were fine. If we can boost those and get you into a testosterone level where you have energy to go to the gym now, and you have energy to engage in your family, and you have a sex drive to have a healthy relationship with your significant other, these are huge things. And so I don't know that there's a number black and white, but just because your number falls just below that range or in that range, if you don't feel well, find somebody who hears you out and changes that for you.
Yeah, that's huge. And you use bioidentical hormones. Do you recommend that bioidentical hormones are the way to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just, I send everything I do to a compound pharmacy because, what you're going to find at a typical pharmacy is not the right dose. And it's very much looking at what that individual needs. There isn't a cookie cutter recipe. It's very much looking at the patient, starting and kind of building to a good spot for them.
That is amazing. So now let's talk about something on the other side for women, and there is a lot of breast cancer these days. In fact, I don't know whether I was living under a rock or what was going on, but you hear of breast cancer like it's like a flu. There's so much of it. Now, I'm going to point it at the estrogenic breast cancer that happens. What can we do to combat that? So obviously I've seen it happen in my own family, and so it's estrogenic based. What is it that people can do to actually prevent that?
Yeah, so we're always looking at it as that just being a hormonal thing, but where that driven is a lot of diet and blood sugar dysregulation and really kind of, misbalancing hormones. The studies done years ago by the World Health Initiative that really looked that, hormone replacement caused cancer. We don't use those hormones anymore. Those were horse-based. They're not even hormones we're using anymore. And the second part of it is those were, again, standardized dosages. They weren't compounded in a pharmacy, just getting exactly what your body needs. And people look at, the breast cancer, and while I by no means say that there's no risk in doing hormone replacement therapy for cancer, but what you need to look at the other side of things is that what takes out the majority of people is falls and broken hips and bones, and your estrogen is a huge part of your bone density. It's a huge part of your heart health. So there's a lot of other risk factors that come when we mismanage not having the right amount of hormones. So again, while cancer is a risk and my heart breaks, I've definitely done my time as a nurse in an oncology unit. My heart breaks for these people, but just restricting all hormones based on just some of that genetics is not necessarily the answer for everyone either. So I think you need to do your family history. You need to look at it. There are those severe genes, and knowing your risk factors for those genes is a huge part of it. But to be honest, cancer is more coming from a lot of things in our diet and food and other things that we are doing that is causing dysregulation in our guts and our lifestyles and the stress and the things that we are doing, more than I think it's driven from doing bioidentical hormone replacement.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, they did a testing in a lab with someone who practices the same kind of mindset stuff as myself. It was actually Deepak Chopra. And because he was an alternative doctor, he looked at what was happening to people who were going through cancer and literally going on to live very normal, long lives. And then the other lot of people that were moving in the other direction. And he came up with this metaphor, and that is that our cells of our body are literally eavesdropping on our thoughts. So he came to this conclusion when he looked at the fact that our cells are renewing so much. Then if our cells are renewing, and why are people still having disease? Why aren't they just getting better? And the answer, as he found, was the same thing that they did in a scientific lab. Get your tongue around that, Terri, where a whole lot of people said love and put love into the water, and then another lot of people were going hate and bitterness, and it literally under a microscope changed color. So the bitterness and all of that's where you're saying with the mindset point of view, I feel that that is absolutely correct. But my question now is, you get the average person that's coming in, they might have thyroid issues, they might feel chronically fatigued. We know this is going on, and we know this is a huge problem. How do you go about testing them? Because as you say, it's not a cutty cooking situation. How do you test from one person to another as a nurse practitioner to guide them and actually support them with the right diet, or should I say the right food and the right hormones?
Yeah, so definitely when we go down the hormone path, that is looking at some blood work. I think one of my biggest frustration with a lot of practitioners is, like, I'll get blood work from other people and they're like, well, they told me my hormones were fine. Well, that's great. They didn't check your progesterone level at all. So I don't know how they told you your hormones are fine. They checked your estrogen and they checked your testosterone, but they didn't check your progesterone. So I don't know how they told you everything's great. So I think it's just starting there. If that's where you're going down, it is looking at all your hormones. So looking at progesterone, testosterone, estrogen. Even in men, we look at your estrogen levels and your testosterone. So, it is getting that complete hormone panel and really identifying where there are deficits. And it depends on where you're at on that journey. For a younger person, I definitely like to start to see where we can start with those lifestyle changes for a period of time to see if we can kind of get them on that better path. Some of the other really cutting edge testing that I love is I do a GI map. It's a DNA based stool test to really look at your gut microbiome and see where you have overgrowth of bad bacteria, you don't have enough good bacteria. And I really like that test as far as it giving me better information about exactly what is going on in your microbiome. Because when we can balance that out and we can get rid of inflammation in there, we do see a big change in your hormones. So again, I think depending on where you're at in your life, as we're getting more towards the menopause, you may be able to do a lot of lifestyle changes and just still be struggling and miserable. And that might require some of those bioidentical hormones. But if you're younger, I like to really approach it from a diet, exercise, gut microbiome. The other test I really like is a mediator release test, looking at food allergies. So again, really identifying where your body is having inflammation, what foods are causing it inflammation. We take out foods that your body's reacting to, because we know when we slow down that inflammation in your gut that your cells start communicating. And when we talk about your gut and your brain, they are all created in one place. It was created out of the same anatomy. That gut brain interaction is huge. When you are stressed, your gut is stressed. And so it is incorporating all the things. You cannot be in this high stress, high life environment and think that you're going to fix all of it with just diet and exercise. You're going to have to do something that you're acutely aware on that mental side is fixing some of those stress, the lifestyle. So for me, it's really encompassing all the things in your life. Where's your stress levels at? What's your diet like? where's your gut microbiome at, and do we need to add hormones into where you're at? So there's so many parts to it. It does take a full,
because
look.
this is a wealth of knowledge for people listening, because there's so many people that are suffering and they want to be able to know what to do. And what you said about the gut is so profound, because it's the gut brain. And the gut brain, like all of that element, people miss that. And yet that's where we hold so much of our stress. So to have good gut health, because this seems to be like the center of the body and the core, apart from the mindfulness, like doing things that you enjoy, breathing deeply, because they say that people who breathe deeply have longer lives. It's actually something that has been proven, because we breathe different when we're stressed to when we're really relaxed. So what are some of the things you recommend to people to keep their gut health really healthy?
Well, you started with the biggest thing we can do, is breathing, which sounds so ironic, but we have two states in our body. We have this fight or flight, and that's our sympathetic response. And we have a parasympathetic response, which is our rest and digestion, right? Most of us very rarely get out of that, fight or flight mode into rest and digestion. And one of the ways we can do that is before you eat is to start with 10 deep breaths. That actually is one of the most helpful ways to really kind of kick us over into that parasympathetic state where we do rest and digest. And so for a lot of people, they can say, like, I'm eating everything correctly. I don't feel well. Well, if you don't ever slow down enough, they're eating while they're working, they're not paying attention, they're eating in the car on the go. But we need to be mindful. We need to slow down, take some deep breaths, because that is what actually releases some of those digestive enzymes that we need to break down our food. So 10 deep breaths, slowing down when we eat our meals can be a huge part of it. Zinc is one of the, elements that we are missing in a lot of our diet. And zinc is one of the most important parts as far as making hydrochloric acid in our stomachs. Why do we care about that? Because hydrochloric acid, if we don't produce that, we don't break down our food. If we don't break down our food, we never get it into the small intestine to be absorbed. And so for a lot of people who are in these high stress lives, they're eating everything right, but maybe they're just not absorbing it because they're not doing the things that they need to bring in those digestive enzymes to have the right, nutrition that they need, like zinc and different things, to really kind of be able to digest and break down their food.
Well, you know what? You just gave me an incredible revelation right there, because when we're taking people through the hypnotic part of releasing and letting go of their excess kilos, the first thing we look at is switching on the metabolism so that, it's not asleep. And, when people eat, sometimes they eat on the run, or they eat, but a lot of people eat unconsciously. And so what that means from the hypnosis world is that they're eating and they're not even conscious. So therefore the metabolism is literally asleep. And, we talk about conscious eating, and that way the metabolism switches on. They become more aware of where they're at when they're eating. Am I still hungry? There's no depriving whatsoever. They are literally listening to their body. But the part where you've just given a huge revelation is the practicality of actually asking people to slow down before they eat. No, I never thought of that. I mean, I always talk about breath work and things, but that is a great way to wake up the metabolism, switch on the conscious brain so that they can eat when they're hungry and listen to their body. And not only that, because they're taking those deep breaths, they're becoming more aware. So how profound is that? Now, I just want to move over to the topic now. We talked about estrogenic breast cancer. And I know that there is no cure. We can't talk about a cure. I know that you're not a surgical doctor, but let's talk about the man. And I guess let's talk about some avoidance where we can help ourselves be more healthier so that we can avoid getting into these, crucial elements. But there's also, as much as there's a lot of breast cancer for women, there's a lot of prostate cancer for men. What would you say to the man to keep his prostate healthy so that perhaps he could not cure, but avoid even getting, caught up in that element? What are some of the tips that you would give to a man?
Yeah, I mean, again, when we talk about metabolic health, and I think it becomes a little bit more prominent in a lot of men, because where do men put on their weight? It's their waistline, right? And
Yeah, it's
so
funny. They look pregnant.
yeah, those big bellies. So when we talk about your overall metabolic health, right? We look at your blood pressure, we look at your, your waistline. Those are signs that you're not metabolically healthy. And when we can see some of those elevated blood pressures, elevated blood sugars, those big waistlines, that shows really significant signs of poor metabolic health. And so if you're talking across the board, like, what do we need to do to optimize preventing any cancer? It's really dialing in our metabolic health. And so again, that comes back to some of those basics. You talk intuitive eating. I talk a lot about just blood sugar dysregulation, meaning don't just wake up and eat a bunch of carbs. Like, when you're going to eat a carbohydrate, not that they're bad, but they do so much better when you pair them with a protein and a fat, so that you do not live, because the second you spike them and they crash down, then you crave more and you're fatigued, and your body's smart and knows what to crave. And when you crash it down, it's going to crave carbs because it needs more carbs to bring that blood sugar up. So it's more like, how do we stabilize out blood sugars? And that's really just not saying carbs are bad, but how do we pair them? How do we do it better? And I think it's looking at our foods. Again, there's so many chemicals and processed foods. And you want to get back to this place where we're eating whole foods again, where you're eating vegetables, where you're eating fruits, where, and not by any means restricting, but eating better and nourishing better. And those other things are not the primary source of all your diet.
And of course, probably my final gory question, literally, is now flicking back to the woman, and the woman that is reaching that kind of phase of their life. And I know young women go through this as well, very heavy periods, and even long-winded ones. Which is obviously a big problem for so many things. Can you talk us through, for that woman, what's going on with her body? What can she do to regulate it? And I know that you did have a client that came to you with that issue. What ended up happening for her, and how were you able to help her through that time when she was, I think you said she was going through periods for like 20 days of the month?
Yeah. So, I mean, and just to emphasize, there's two parts to that, right? Like, as a young girl, like, really struggling with that. For a lot of young girls, I look at that, they're not eating enough, right? They're definitely not eating enough protein, and they're not eating enough fats. They're living on more of a restricted diet, and they're not getting as much of those things that they really need. And that's creating a lot of that dysregulation. So again, making sure that you recognize the importance of protein in your diet. Fats we talked about, but the other thing that for most women, they are not getting enough protein. They're kind of just really in this restrictive. So if I can get anything across to women, is we've got to get out of this restrictive mindset and more of a nourishing mindset. And so for this patient, at the point that I had gotten her, she was so hormonally a mess. It did require some bioidentical hormones, just because she was to the point of not functioning, having her period 20 days a month. Along with her period came symptoms of, GI upset, diarrhea, spending too much of her workday trying to get out of the bathroom for different things. Nobody can function like that. And then having your period that many days a month led to anemia, and that just increases the fatigue. And it just was a vicious cycle for this person. So we did a lot of work on diet, but we did do some bioidentical hormones to really kind of help her balance that out, to get her in a place where she could make it through her day and wasn't just debilitated by her day.
Wow, that is very, very that's hard. That would just be so difficult because it's just such an obstruction. And I know that as we were talking, like people that come through and do these elements where they're heard, and they're heard from the point of view of whatever they're going through, even if they feel like it's just an energy dysfunction. How do all these things affect their energy?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, when our hormones are in balance, we do not have the energy to do the things that we want to do. And so, yeah, when we have blood sugar dysregulation and when our sugars are up and down, and then our hormones aren't being made, I mean, there's so many pieces to that that just create this ultimate fatigue. And so, just making sure that we find ways to balance all that out.
So if someone came to you and said, look, I am really tired, I'm fatigued all the time, would you put it down to their diet, their hormones, and a lot of these elements we've just talked about today?
Yeah, because I mean your body is meant to make everything that it should. So we really need to start looking at the cellular level. Why is your mitochondria not functioning at its optimal level? Why is it not doing the things that it should, right? Because every single one of us, you hear a lot, well, my genes just got passed down to me, and that's not true. I mean, under the same stressors, you will respond as your ancestors, but we do not have this thing where just because my parents have it, I will have it. And so I see that mindset a lot with people. Well, I guess this is just what I'm going to do. My dad had it, my mom had it, and just have kind of given up, not recognizing how much power and control you have over your lifestyle, diet, and exercise, to really make changes, that none of that is just genetically being handed down to you. And so you do have power to make some of those changes to create a better hormonal balance for you.
And in true Terri Messenger's Genius Zone podcast, you are a classic example of the Genius Zone because of the fact that you suffered so much yourself and then you decided to go out and study and find out what is actually getting to the bottom of this. And your guru moment came when you went into that doctor and they just totally overpriced what they were doing, and you didn't feel heard and you were frustrated, and as a result you've turned up as extremely passionate in this field. And what I'm hearing from you is that and just correct me if I'm wrong, so people that are going to come into your service, and you do specialized tailor-made services, and I believe you offer them online and in person, but what they can expect predominantly is increased energy and clarity, stabilized mood, and better stress resilience, weight loss management, and a healthier metabolism, improved menstrual health for the woman and sexual function, as well as, the man also having all of those elements that go together with his sexuality and his primal health. And of course, this all comes from the fact that you are helping people to restore their hormone balance and move into long-term wellness. So would you say this is exactly what you really are passionate about doing?
I am passionate. I never want somebody to feel as defeated as I felt in that doctor's office. It was soul crushing. It hurt me to my very core, and I never want people to feel like that they don't have any answers to their hormones and to what they're struggling with. And essentially everything comes back to just having somebody take the time to educate, look at things, and talk to you. And there are people out there find them. I am here, but I just don't want anybody to ever walk away feeling as hopeless as I did leaving that doctor's office.
Wow. So bioidentical hormones to suit your DNA. I love that. And, I always love to ask this question, at the end of my podcast, because I find that we build momentum kind of at the center and toward the end. So I want to ask you to really speak to someone out there in a way that you would love to just expound on something to help them. And it's something that, well, if you got off this podcast and you went on with the rest of your day and night and you went, oh, I didn't say that. What would you love to say that perhaps, you'll know that I have really done justice to someone here who needs to hear this?
I think just recognizing that you matter, that it doesn't matter how many people you're taking care of and you don't feel like you have time for you, that you matter today and that you need to be heard and you are important. And I think so many women and men just get overlooked and feel like, well, I don't have time for me. And I just want people to know that they matter, and feeling awful is not the answer.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much for adding value to people on this topic that may have been, a little bit gory for some, a little bit kept in the dark for others, and a little bit awakening for probably a lot of people to realize, oh my gosh, I'm allowed to eat fat. Oh my gosh, I'm allowed to be free. Oh my gosh, there is an answer for what I'm going through, and I'm just going to go and see Jenica and find out exactly where my hormones are. So what we're going to do is we're going to put your connection in the show notes. So if you're feeling that you've related to this and what Jenica has been talking about, please do not hesitate to contact this woman and get the help you need. Don't put up with health that is running you down, causing you fatigue, and even having those mysterious illnesses that you just haven't been able to put your finger on, and you haven't been able to get the answers from your doctor. So I just want to say thank you so much, Jenica, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Terri. I really have loved spending my time with you tonight.
Thank you for joining us on another empowering episode of our show, where we have explored through this various topic, along with all the exciting new topics that we bring every week to enhance your personal mastery of excellence. Now, I'd love you to do me a favor. In fact, be part of the Legacy 1 million that I have in the vision for 2028. If you know someone who really would benefit from this recording, from this episode, please share it with them. And when you subscribe, you get notified every week of our episode as soon as it drops. So let's do that legacy thing. Let's share, let's care, let's enrich. And I look forward to bringing you another week of the most enriching content. So until next time, stay inspired, stay awesome, and keep on mastering your excellence.